Alright, welcome back everyone to Phoenix Point for what I hope will be the first of a couple of class guide videos where I break down in detail the perk trees, uses and equipments of particular classes. And I wanted to start with the Heavy. Why did I start with the Heavy? And the answer is because Heavies are complicated and at the same time probably give us some clue as to why human armies completely failed to defeat the Pandora virus when initially attacked. Because they are the testament of stupidity in their default gearing and they require considerable reconsideration in order to make work. So what am I going to do in order? I'm going to talk through the basic gearing of the Heavies, what you find them in. I'm then going to go through the perk tree. And then doing so, I'm going to discuss the problems that the default loadouts have, and thus how you can instead use a Heavy differently to the way the game prompts you to use it. And then finally go on to an evaluation of how many do you want in a team, how do you want to use them, and what's our overall rating of the class. I'll finish up with a discussion of multiclassing, but I feel that's a different topic than the basic Heavy run through. So there are three basic Heavy loadouts: the Phoenix Point one, the Independent one, and the New Jericho as the three factions that produce Heavies. Synedrian and Anu do not produce indigenous Heavies. The one you'll get at the start of the game of most difficulties, who I've dressed up generic Heavy here as at the moment, is a Phoenix Point loadout with Golem armour, a Hell 2 Phoenix Heavy cannon, and note that the armour here includes the jump pack. There are some problems with this, but we'll come back to those in a moment. The other version you can get, depending on your difficulty. So if you're playing on the lower levels of difficulty, you might be able to recruit troops with their equipment in beginning, as opposed to having to build every given piece of equipment. If so, you might get New Jericho Heavies. New Jericho Heavies wear the Anvil equipment and carry a Deceptor MG instead of the Hell 2 cannon. In many ways, in terms of the armor, this is pretty much a straight upgrade. Golem armor is 34 armor and -2 mobility. New Jericho armor is 40 armor and -2 mobility. And the difference in impact on accuracy is exactly 0. So apart from you saving 1 weight on the Phoenix Point equipment relative to the New Jericho gear, the much tankier New Jericho equipment is just superior. Plus, when the jet jump on this one fires, it comes out like angel's wings and you look pretty badass. The same relationship holds true with the other pieces. The armor ratings on the helmets favor the New Jericho design, but here there's not even an advantage in terms of weight. There is a slight difference in terms of perception, but you're not going to need a huge amount of perception on most builds of Heavy, at least the ones that are wearing heavy armor, and finally the leg pieces. There is a third version of the Heavy, and in the old days you didn't used to have to worry about it, but now that rescuing troops is an outcome at scavenging sites, a lot of your recruits and gear at the start of the game are probably going to come from those scavenging sites, which means you're going to end up with this. This is, you need the shitter machine gun. There you go, the Uragan. This is the Independent generic Heavy with terrible armor, which has the weight, which has similar weight profiles to the Phoenix Point armor and slows you down just as much as both the others, but doesn't have a jetpack. Amazing, along with an inferior MG. Let's get the basics out of the way first. The fundamental design of the basic Heavy in Phoenix Point is stupid. I don't know what the Phoenix Project, New Jericho, or these independent guys were thinking fielding troops like this. Let's go through the basic problems first. We'll start with the Phoenix Project version, and then we'll explain how it is pretty much the same through the others, but with slight differences. Here are some basic problems. Firstly, the armor and the weapon do not synergize at all. Golem armor gives you the advantage of slow walk speed, but a reasonable amount of protection in exchange for losing a tremendous amount of accuracy. You lose 10% accuracy on the helmet, 10% accuracy on the chest piece, 10% accuracy on the legs. You do have a jetpack, which gives you a fixed amount of movement, which seems like a good deal, but it takes 3 AP in order to activate that. It pairs this arrangement, which is a slow-moving chassis with negative accuracy, with a weapon which is highly inaccurate and short-ranged, and costs 3 action points to fire. What this means, if you want to fire a shot from this cannon, you can only do 1 AP worth of movement before you fire that shot. If you're in low mobility armor, then you're not going to get much movement out of that one movement point to begin with. So you're not really going anywhere fast, especially if you want to be shooting. The other problem is you've got an inaccurate high damage gun. Inaccurate because it's got that low effective range, and you're pairing it with a bunch of negative accuracy gear. That is a recipe for turning this weapon into a 3 AP shotgun. It is a short-ranged weapon at best, but you're in gear, which prevents you getting into short range with it. You're like, well, maybe I can use the jetpack. Well, here's some problems. The first is the jetpack is best for getting you into high locations, you would think. Locations where you can fire down on targets and fire from the ledge and then step back, and so exploit the time units mechanics in order to be impossible to hit. Here's the problem. Heavies carry weapons at the hip. Carrying weapons at the hip means it's often very hard to fire over fences, walls, and barriers that tend to sit at the top of large buildings, which means that even if you go to a high area, so you waste an entire turn jumping to the top of a building, and then the next turn you step to the edge of the ledge, often you're not going to be able to shoot this cannon. It'll just hit the wall. And even if you can shoot the cannon, you're so inaccurate that there is no way you're going to be landing hits at any appreciable distance. The result is the heavy just feels like a wet fish. It moves around too slowly and is too action point intensive to actually get any attacks out. Compared to things like assaults, which are going to take 2 AP to move, they're going to move further because their armor has less reduction in terms of movement, and then they're going to fire their rifle for 2 AP. That rifle is more accurate than the Hell Cannon, their armor is more accurate than heavy armor, they're going to hit at a longer distance. It's just easier to use, whereas the heavy just sort of wallows around. The other gear doesn't really make this situation any better. The new Jericho gear, by switching over to this heavy machine gun, actually reduces your effective range slightly further. And in reality, I find that the Hell 2 cannon is more useful at a given range than the Deceptor, other than very close range. The reason being, you'll want to fire this often against small and medium targets, which are harder to hit. The Hell Cannon, it's good enough to hit anywhere on a sufficiently large target. The armor helps, but you shouldn't be taking hits. The goal of Phoenix Point is often to kill the enemy as quickly as efficiently as possible, and then to deny them any return fire, either by not being in line of sight. It's not about tanking hits. This game isn't about tanking hits. This armor is useful for tanking hits, but you're never going to be in that position ideally, especially because you can only spend 1 AP and shoot. Problematic. The situation gets absolutely dire if you look at the independent guy, because in this case, you're back down to a weapon that is firstly horrible. The 10 times 35 damage Uragan with effective range 10. This is a horrible gun. This is absolutely horrid. Then you've got armor, which is still negative accuracy, negative mobility, mostly negative mobility on the chest piece there. It's actually a little bit far. I didn't notice that. It's actually a little bit faster than the Phoenix Point because it doesn't have a negative mobility on the legs, which the other two do. This one doesn't. So you're going to get one more thing of movement. Hooray. But there's no jetpack. So here you're stuck legging it in armor that makes legging it almost impossible, or at least really bloody frustrating. So the independent one, what you'll find is they'll lag behind your entire squad. They won't be able to keep up with the maneuver elements, and you'll never get them close enough to a target to actually put their machine gun to effective use. So basic outfit of the heavy in all 3 versions is crap. The perks don't really make it any better because they're a confusing morass that for the most part don't actually serve the purpose that the heavy seems designed to do. The first is gives you 50% more bash and melee damage, which suggests you want to get this thing into close combat and hit people. But you're wallowing around so bloody slowly in your heavy gear that you're probably not going to get there in most cases. And you can't jet jump and then hit people in close combat in most scenarios because melee attacks, proper melee attacks, the strike melee attack costs 2. All you're going to be able to do at best is jet jump and bash. Tell me, in a game where you can have dashing assaults with shotguns, why would your best approach be to jet jump someone in so they can hit them with the butt of their gun? Brawler to me costs 10 because it's junk. It has niche applications which we can talk about later. There are specific multi-class sort of builds or cybernetic builds where Brawler might be relevant. But for the most part, it just leads you astray by convincing you to do something with this class that it's not really best at. Warcry gives you another temptation to jet jump into the middle of people and just sit there like an idiot. What Warcry does is, for 1 action point, so you can jet jump and then fire it, enemies within 10 tiles lose half of their action points. So instead of having 4, they have 2. That's a reasonably good radius. It encourages you to dumb things with your heavies because 2 action points is still enough for most enemy types to attack. So if those things are Tritons, if those things are Arthrons, heck, if those things are just about any human threat out there, what they're going to do when they find they can't move and shoot is, but you're right there, is the computer's going to go, hey, look, there's a lot of damage I can inflict on this target that's right freaking here, and they'll kill you, or they'll inflict lots of damage on you. That's pretty wasteful, considering that had this person been a sniper, they could instead simply have killed either 1 or 2 of those targets. This is the same level as quick aim. They could have taken 2 sniper shots, removed 2 arms, and taken 2 targets entirely out of the fight, instead of 2 targets losing half their action points for 1 turn, and the heavy being in the middle of the problems. New class is the same for everyone. Boom Blast is completely useless if you're using a heavy the way it is built by default. It does nothing for a machine gun heavy, it does nothing for a Hell 2 cannon heavy. And yet it's probably the best ability in the chain, because as we'll talk about in a moment, I think explosive using heavies are actually the best version of their heavy, and it's not a default build. Boom Blast reduces the cost of grenades and other explosive weapons by 1, and importantly increases their range by 50% until the end of the turn for the cost of 5 will. What this means is that once you get access to the Rebuke, which is the powerful alien tech unlimited ammo grenade launcher, which you can do in the mid-game or even the early mid-game if you rush for it and are lucky with your searches, is that you suddenly have an indirect fire tool, and we'll talk about that as one of the viable builds later. Inspire means killing an enemy grants allies 1 additional will point. That doesn't synergize at all with Warcry. It probably doesn't synergize with Brawler. It does reasonably well with Boom Blast, but it doesn't really make much of a difference if you're machine gunning 1 enemy per turn. The final thing is Rage Burst. Rage Burst used to be one of the most powerful abilities in the game. It used to be you just fire at a target until your magazine is empty. They changed that to you fire 5 times in an arc, a spread out flame arc in front of you. In reality, it's pretty useless now. Like if you get right up to a target like a Scylla, maybe it is of use. But you could always put out 2 grenades instead, and it's not incredibly niche. So by default, this is sort of a confused set, and none of these things really directly benefits the default heavy build. The default heavy, which can't hit anything, can't get anywhere, can't kill anything, and certainly isn't fast enough to go in and bash people. Those of you who played this game probably realize pretty quickly that the Berserker class, which actually does end up hitting people in close combat a fair amount, does so because it's bloody fast. Assaults are the other people who are likely to melee people, not heavies who barely get any mobility. So how do you fix it? How do you fix this heavy? Let's just say you start day 1 and you're presented with this monstrosity. What do you do in order to make this thing viable? Well, the first thing to remember is that in Phoenix Point, there's no armour proficiencies. Any soldier can wear any armour type without a problem. So let's instantly solve part of the problem for the heavy. This is still a heavy, only now he's wearing full Sanhedrian sniper gear, which means he's gone from negative 10, 20, 30. So he's gone from negative 30% accuracy to plus 20, 35, 45, 50 to plus 50%. So that is a swing of 80% on the accuracy, which is incredible. And what you'll find now is this heavy, who is in sniper. So you've turned him over into sniper gear, or at worst, you can put him into basic Phoenix assault gear. Even just changing the helmet, which is the highest accuracy reward piece, and also has reasonable options like this is the independent sniper helmet. That's still a 25% swing in accuracy. What you'll find now is that your new heavy is one, much more mobile. Well, not if you put full sniper gear on. It's only slightly more mobile in that case. If you go assault gear, you lose some of the accuracy, you gain some speed. This is now a more mobile heavy, but importantly, it's able to fire this Hell Cannon at a much longer effective range. You're able to hit Arthrons and Tritons with some degree of regularity. This is a patch fix. It lets you use the basic weapon and have a heavy hitting, damage dealing weapon that you started with, so you may as well use, just by shuffling your equipment around a little bit. So this is one option on how to make a heavy viable in the early game. You can do compromises if you really want. So for example, you can have a heavy that can jump because it's still got the heavy chest piece, but it's getting accuracy boosts from its leg and its helmet. And if you set yourself up correctly, most of your hits should be chest or head. You shouldn't take hits in the legs most of the time if you're using cover properly. That's obviously map dependent, but I find as a general rule, I get hit in the head and the chest a lot more than I get hit in the legs. This is a much better version of the original heavy. It also does improve the accuracy of the Deceptor and the machine guns a little bit. For those, however, you might be tempted to switch into like assault gear instead. So I've got some assault gear handy. I do. Do I have assault independent? I might have to go loot. Anyway, the point is, if you switch into independent gear, not independent gear, assault gear, you're suddenly going to start getting speed bonuses. At that point, you might actually be able to get this machine gun somewhere useful. So rather than taking a high accuracy approach, you take a high mobility approach, treat it like a 3 AP shotgun, put it in close range to a target and pull the trigger. 12 burst, 35 damage and 2 shred means this is more damaging than a shotgun. It is going to do more damage than a shotgun if you can get it where it needs to be. So a mobility build is one way to get your heavies viable in the early game. Really though, if you're going to move into the late game, there's a couple, well not the late game, even past the early game, there's a few other ways that you can make the heavy useful. The most useful I find, and the dominant build, is something like this. And remember, the armor here is not important other than the chest piece, but you can wear the armor without problems. So, what is this? Well, this is our original heavy build. He's very heavily armored and he relies on his jump jets for mobility. But that's now suddenly fine, because this heavy has a ancient tech grenade launcher and will tech to boom blast, which means his job, in most cases, most engagements, is to jet jump onto the highest building or piece of terrain, usually forward of the team. If he happens to take some flak because you scouted incorrectly, he's going to be okay because of his armor, at least for one turn. Plus, location on a building is usually relatively safe from most Pandorans that aren't artillery Pandorans. So he's going to jet jump up there, he and maybe one of his friends. And that's fine, they're going to sit in the middle of that roof. And then they're going to boom blast and put out 2 grenades per turn anywhere on the map, recovering when they have to. Suddenly, the armor is not a problem, because he doesn't need to move. He doesn't need to be close. Suddenly he's got almost map-wide reach. He can fire this grenade almost anywhere on the map. The fact that he can't shoot over the rims of buildings is not a problem because the grenade launcher fires in an arc, meaning you can actually fire from behind cover. The fact that he requires 3 AP to use his jetpack is again, it's okay because he only needs 2 to fire his weapon twice per turn, and if he loses a turn every now and again relocating, that's alright. It also means during salvage missions, he can transition from being fire support to jet jumping to overload on salvage and then jet jump towards the recovery point. This version of the heavy takes it from being trash tier to a critical part of your team. And so I think it's one of the viable builds. The other thing you can do if you want to add even further like firepower and flexibility, is heavies with some strength can carry a mounted weapon as well. This will be either a Jericho Fury 2 missile launcher, which is a 1 AP cost blast weapon with a relatively long range that you can jet jump and fire, or you can fire a grenade launcher without boom blast and still fire the rocket launcher. Or you can mount a laser array, which I haven't built because it's very tech expensive relative to what it is, but gives you extra relatively accurate direct fire capability. This is, I think, the dominant non-multi-classed heavy build. There are some other options to discuss. For example, a heavy with a flamethrower and some mobility. Come on, someone give me a helmet, any helmet. That's not really a good idea, but whatever. Mobility gear and the flamethrower. The flamethrower is an interesting weapon that hits multiple body parts, is AoE, can fan out. I'm not a huge fan, but some people swear by the use of flamethrowers in high mobility units. This is again treating a heavy as a form of specialized assault sort of trooper. It relies on mobility, only in this case, because you're using a flamethrower, you no longer need accuracy boosting, so you can go over to things like Berserker body armor or certain cybernetics and mutations. All you need is speed in order to get that cone where it needs to be. So that's the basics. That's the basics of the heavy. How many would I use at various points of the game? How do I evaluate them before we talk about multi-class capabilities? At the start of the game, all I care about is getting the starting heavy troop to be useful. That means keeping the Hell 2 cannon. It means keeping the cannon and re-armoring the damn things. It means getting, or more realistically, probably something like this happening as soon as possible, and then even replacing that chest piece. I prefer something like that early in the game, just so this weapon is somewhat viable. I then don't recruit many more early on, because the heavy struggles to be as effective, as efficient as other units with the T1 loadout. It also doesn't help that its T1 loadout is actually very expensive. For those of you who play on higher difficulties where you have to build every piece of equipment you don't steal, a Hell 2 cannon, so the basic equipment of the heavy soldier, costs 145 materials and 18 tech to build, and then it's 26 materials, 3 tech for every magazine. The grenade launcher, as I've discussed before, is horrifically expensive to fuel. It's moderately expensive to make, but the ammunition will bankrupt you, and so it's almost impossible to justify. There's the 88 tech Destiny laser array, by the way. Oof. Sure, it has 240 damage and is almost perfectly accurate. Like, it's an amazing weapon, but it's expensive to build, and it's expensive to fuel. Compare and contrast to an assault where you can build a shotgun for 75 materials and 4 tech, or an assault rifle for 95 materials and 5 tech. Only the shotgun's actually a good weapon. You can build and equip. You can equip several troops with shotguns for the price of making 1 Hell 2 cannon. The number is somewhere between 2 and 3, I believe. The armour is also moderately expensive, so for a soldier that is less impressive and less serviceable than an assault, or say a sniper early game, where you can build a firestorm for 120 and 7, which is still cheaper than building a Hell 2 cannon, and still very damaging, but much more accurate and capable of reaching out and touching someone from a great distance, I don't see a reason to proliferate heavies. So how many heavies should I use in a team at the start of the game? 1 in my starting team and 0 in all the others. Personal preference, because I don't see the value until they've leveled up a bit. Things then change in the mid and late game, where 2 things happen. 1, your soldiers start to get experience, so multi-classing opens up, and 2, you get access to the Rebuke if you have Legacy of the Ancients and you've done Protean Mutane, which I would recommend doing as your first alien resource, and you start pumping out Rebukes. The Rebukes that are, I'll remind you, pretty bloody affordable at 175 materials, 0 tech. So it's just about producing the gas and then have unlimited ammunition and do lots and lots of damage with decent shred and fantastic range. At that point, I would say the correct number of heavies for a team is probably at least 2 to give you mean that in any given turn, you can pick 4 locations that need to be on the receiving end of grenades and do a lot of damage to them from positions that are relatively high and can reach the entire map. I think they are invaluable to add to teams at that stage of the game. The other thing to note is that, as I said, heavies start to level up like everyone else, and you start to get access to the ability to multi-class. And multi-classing a heavy starts to open up more possibilities. Are they the best class to multi-class with? No, but there are benefits and opportunities there. So, for example, a heavy berserker can do 4 grenades in a turn with Adrenaline Rush in exchange for doing none on the turn afterwards. A heavy assault can do rapid clearance with grenades, and if you're clearing groups, particularly of worms, you can put 1 grenade into a tough alien, then go blow up a worm, or a cluster of worms, get all your AP back, and then put more grenades into the first one. This is assuming you have Boom Blast up. It does mean quite possibly the strongest heavy combo I've got so far is a Assault Berserker Cross that has the random ability which unlocked heavy weapons and gave them bonus damage, because that can use rapid clearance and Adrenaline Rush in order to just rain, I think the record I have is 12 grenades in a turn being fired off, which is just hilarity. The fact that Scyllas produce what do you call them? Mind fraggers is basically free additional hits onto the target for that turn, for which I greatly appreciate. So those are viable cross classes. If you look at something like the Infiltrator Tree, let's have a quick look. Okay, so infiltrators have, sorry about the gearing here for the moment. Infiltrators have really cool things like Sneak Attack, which is damage while not spotted, increased by 100%. And Surprise Attack, attacks from behind gain shock value equal to 3 times the damage dealt. So it's relatively simple to keep a heavy from being spotted and then putting a grenade onto someone's face. So an Infiltrator heavy can actually be is an interesting build, which I'm only just starting to experiment with now, but I think has great potential. There are also sets that used to be dominant, but I don't think have much role anymore. So, for example, snipers used to be one of the more commonly multi-classed heavies, because what that meant you could do is you could have a sniper rifle and the old rage burst mechanic. You could pick a target basically anywhere that you could see on the map and empty a magazine of Pythagoras ammo at it, 15 shots in one turn, and kill basically anything. You could murder things effectively at very long range. The nerf to rage burst means that sniper is no longer as attractive. Quick aim is an alternative to boom blast if you're not using explosive weapons, but I think you should use explosive weapons, so I'm not going to advocate quick aim. I'm not going to advocate proficient master marksman, because accuracy doesn't matter that much with grenades, and weak spot removing armor from body parts doesn't matter much when you have 30 shred on each grenade that you put out. So you can see how I would say that in general the sniper tree no longer offers that much for a heavy, assuming that you're going to build your heavies into jumping grenade launcher units. If you're using the Hell 2 cannon build, then maybe Master Marksman and Quick Aim might actually mean you can pick out and put 1 accurate round, maybe 2 at most, 1 to 2 accurate rounds of Hell 2 fire out per turn. Or you might get some moderately effective machine gun fire. Who knows? But as a general rule, I no longer rate the sniper as a multi-class. Assaults. Assault multi-classing a heavy is it's interesting. It's one way to get a little extra utility out of the machine gun and the Hell 2 cannon versions of the heavy, right? Because dash gives you the ability to move using some will, but makes up for the cost of using your weapon somewhat. So you're going to be more likely to be able to put that Hell cannon or machine gun on target. Giving you return fire if you have enough perception in a Hell cannon can be good. I don't like having to return fire because I don't like things shooting at me as a general rule. Return fire is there more to cover for your mistakes or help you out during the worst possible scenarios, but the damage is usually already done. And it doesn't help at all versus things like sniper tritons that will inflict a lot of your casualties in a lot of cases. But this works with a hell cannon. And you can put a heavily armored unit with a hell cannon in the middle of a bunch of enemies that can barely hurt it, and when they fire at it, you will kill them with return fire because they don't understand that they're barely hurting your heavy armor, and you will murder them right back. Ready for action, for me, is worthless. It's worthless on the assault too, because in my view, the ultimate goal is to transition to alien tech weaponry, and alien tech weaponry doesn't have a magazine. Also, in the interim, your assault rifle of preference has a very large magazine, which is the Demos, and ready for action on shotguns you shouldn't normally have to do. Onslaught, not particularly useful on heavies. Rapid clearance has some utility. Rapid clearance has some utility on heavies, I'll admit, but mostly when you're using boom blasting explosives and exploiting the fact that you can kill multiple enemies with one grenade in order to get all your points back so you can put more fire on another target and keep the chain going. So that's one thing. If there is an example of a multi-class I'd never do, it would be something like the Priest. Because why? They're different roles. They're distinct different roles. I don't see a reason to have my heavy spending its turns mind controlling or inducing panic, spending its willpower on these things, when it could be using those to use its weapon more effectively. I also don't want to put a priest in heavy's armor most of the time. There's just... And your heavy on its building is likely not to be proximate to the rest of your team, so things like Inspire Fury and Psychic Ward and whatnot, not particularly useful. Not particularly useful to me. So this is this is a trash combination, as far as I am concerned. So if I was to nominate who would I normally multi-class with a heavy, I'm experimenting with Infiltrator. I would consider Assault. I would consider Berserker. Final one I didn't mention, I believe, in case I've forgotten any others, is the Technician. To me, the Technician is at its best when you're going to be holding the robotic arms, which means Technician armor, which you're not going to have because you want the jet jump. Now, the deployment and the field medics are most useful when you're up with your team, supporting them, which your heavies often won't be. And getting turrets into the position where they can fire down often means not being where you want to be to launch your grenades. So as far as I'm concerned, these support classes, the priests and the technicians, don't belong as a multi-class for a mid to a late game heavy, because the role of a mid-late game heavy is to go somewhere high and then sling grenades all over the map. Or if you're raiding a Pandoran tunnel and you can't do that, to switch into relatively agile gear, break out a machine gun or a hell cannon and go to work. So for all those reasons, I would reject the priest and the technician. I would stick to berserkers, infiltrators, and assaults. I would skip sniper. So there we go. That's the heavy in a nutshell. I know this might be a little hard to follow when we haven't done the armor guide yet, and make no mistake, the guide to armor is coming, because armor is almost as important as your weapon choice in Phoenix Point. And when you combine that with the possibilities of augmentations, so cybernetics and bionics, which I think need to be discussed as a topic of their own now that the selection has been expanded greatly. I'm just waiting until I unlock tier 3 mutations to demonstrate that in a video. I understand that might take away from it, but the basic essence of it is, think about the way your equipment synergizes to a particular battlefield role. Except that the basic heavy is poorly designed. He's too slow and too inaccurate to do the job using a weapon which is slow, inaccurate, and short-ranged. This is bad. Ditch this, replace it with armor which will allow you to actually use that cannon, and accept that he's going to be a little more fragile. Later in the game, give him a rebuke. Give him this. Give him this, give him a jetpack, put him somewhere high, and have him rain death down on anything. It makes clearing ancient sites much, much easier. It makes clearing a lot of Pandoran sites easier. It makes breaking into buildings easier. There's not many tactical scenarios that are not made much easier by the presence of a Boom Blast Heavy with a Rebuke. So, final rating. Early game Heavy. I think they're crap. I don't think they're good. I would not make Heavies early in the game. They're too expensive and too ineffective at what they set out to do. Medium game, I rate them high. Probably not S tier, but they're getting up there. They're certainly a critical part of a team in the sense that they give you that fire support option. I would pack 2, probably no more than 3 per team, all carrying rebukes to give you that fire support element. I'd consider leaving them behind when you're in a tunnel, or at least bringing fewer and switching out their gear. Although carrying a rebuke in a tunnel is still useful because you'd be surprised when you can get grenade shots off. So that's it for today. That was my commentary on the Heavy. Let me know what you think I've missed. What other uses do you have for the Heavy that you think deserve mention? Have I been unfair to the T1 Heavy? Was humanity actually smart to gear troops out in this manner? I don't think so, but maybe you think otherwise. Cheers for listening, and I'll be back with another guide soon.